Hello, everybody. This is Carly, Chief Executive of Driving Instructors Association. I just thought I'd do a short video today on what activity are we undertaking at Driving Instructors Association to speak to or lobby DVSA around the issue of driving test waiting times. I'm aware that there is a perception that DIA and the other national associations and the National Association Strategic Partnership, which I chair at the moment, aren't necessarily doing an awful lot. What I would say about that is I think that's an issue of perception rather than reality. And that's our fault as well, because if we haven't been telling you what we're doing, then how are you supposed to know what we're doing? So today, I just wanted to do a brief summary of the activity that we've been engaged in to try and both speak to DVSA about why some of their measures might not be having the impact that we would hope they would have had by now, but also what other methodologies and solutions could be employed to have that impact on driving down test waiting times. So just firstly, to briefly describe what activity we've already undertaken today. We have regular meetings with DVSA. Admittedly, we haven't had one at the moment since February, as in face-to-face or online. But in those meetings, you would see quite a lot of pushback from NASP and the independent organisations within that on things like test waiting times. And if you go to the nasp.org.uk website, you will see the minutes of that particular meeting in February and the things we were discussing there. However, as a result of the meeting that we had in February, and as a result of seeing in March that test waiting times were going up again rather than down to 21.3 weeks, with the figures quoted in March, I actually suggested to NASP that we, collaboratively wrote to Loveday Ryder and the senior minute management team at DVSA, reflecting our ongoing and actually deepening concerns about the prolonged issues with test waiting times. So that I'll very briefly in a moment summarise what's in that letter. We will publish that shortly. We sent the letter to DVSA last week. We haven't had a response yet. I would have expected one by now, in all honesty. I believe some personnel might be on holiday, but personally speaking, I would have been quick to respond to an email from a significant stakeholder like NASP that was entitled something to do with concerns about driving test waiting times. However, we'll give them the grace to come back to us, but we'll also publish that letter now to our memberships. And we've also undertaken a survey of members as well, which you may have participated on, which is asking you to evaluate the effectiveness of DVSA measures to manage test waiting times. Some of you will have also seen me on the media talking about this or heard me on the radio. And obviously I also gave evidence at the Transport Select Committee back in December when MPs and ministers were asking questions about what could be done to resolve the issues. So very quickly in the letter itself. So this is a letter that we sent out last week. It's in its introduction, states that we are continuing to be concerned about the issues. We're not necessarily convinced of the solutions that DVSA have come up with. It's beginning to feel like Groundhog Day. We're having the same conversations over and over again and the same result. It's also like Einstein's definition of madness. Some of the same things are being done, having the same result, and we're not getting much further. Some of the key points that we've made here on behalf of NASP, but these are actually points DIA has been making for quite a while now, is that the 7-point plan that was introduced in December to tackle test waiting times and make the booking system better, and stop the exploitation of learners and ADIs through the issues the booking system has at the moment. That has been a set of measures that were brought in by DVSA as some kind of, not necessarily silver bullet, but some kind of set of solutions. But what we noted, first of all, from that initial plan was that 25% of it were actually plans to consult on plans. They weren't definitive actions that were going to be put in stream and have an impact right then. So DIA individually started to have an issue with that 7-point plan early doors, as it were, because if 25% of your 7-point plan to tackle test waiting times are about waiting longer for solutions to be brought to bear, then that's a problem in itself. The other issue that we've had as an organisation, but we reflect that on behalf of NASP in this letter as well, is that we're now 4 months into the 7-point plan and waiting times have gone up. Now, I don't have to hand the figures for the end of March, but the figures given by DVSA's press office in March were 21.3 weeks. Now, you'll remember in 2021, Loveday Ryder wrote to all of you and said that 15 weeks as a waiting time was unacceptable and there would be measures taken to drive that down. We're now nearly 4 years on and waiting times have gone up a further 7 weeks, and we've had several successive plans to try and tackle this issue or initiatives, and waiting times have increased. So confidence in the agency's ability to deal with the ongoing problem of test waiting times is ebbing considerably. And we need to reflect that as organisations, and we need to let you know that we are trying to communicate that not just to the agency, but to their wider stakeholders such as DFT, the Transport Select Committee, all of those people as well who can, maybe support the agency better or put more pressure on the agency about doing things that might have a quicker impact. Going through the letter very briefly, the key areas that we drive down into a bit more detail that we have concerns aren't working as well as they should do are reflective of the key elements of their plan. So the first issue we are challenging in this letter is examiner recruitment and retention. Very, very quickly, because it's in the letter and it's actually in the minutes of the last NAS meeting, DVSA have had 2 recruitment campaigns to recruit new examiners. This is a pivotal element of their plans to drive down test waiting times, to increase supply of examiners, to increase supply of tests, therefore driving down test waiting times. They are a third of their target of recruitment. Their target was around about 450 new examiners, and they are at a stage of about an actual recruitment of 200 and odd. Their actual recruitment target, what they think they will actually achieve, is 300. That's the latest update that we were given as NASP, and that's a third down on their stated original target. The other issue that they have is they lose 10 to 12 examiners a month. So existing examiners, there is attrition of 10 to 12 examiners each month. So that is a problem. So recruiting new examiners is a problem, and they're not hitting their targets there, despite 2 campaigns. And retaining the ones that they've got is also a problem. So they lose 10% a year or more of their existing examiners. And some of the issues in both those areas are triggered by things like pay and conditions. So if you saw the Transport Select Committee, you would have seen PCS and ourselves saying you need to review the pay for examiners if pay is an issue of attraction and attrition. So in this letter, we ask, it was a question at the Select Committee, what has been done to review pay and conditions for driving examiners, because we know it's a problem in attrition and retention and recruitment. So that has to be solved to resolve this overall crisis. So we're bringing some pressure to bear on whether this solution to pay them more and improve their conditions has even been investigated. We recognise it's a long process to change civil service grades and pay bands or change groups of people between them. But we'd like to know that since December, that has been explored in some way as a potential solution. The other thing we challenge in here is, whilst we support things like the Ready to Pass campaign, in terms of using communications to educate consumers, i.e. pupils, not to leap too soon for their test, to make sure they're ready, that they don't waste a test by taking it when they're not ready. It's too long a burn communications campaign. So we challenge that should have been part of the 7-point plan if the 7-point plan was about quick measures that can have a quick impact, because the Ready to Pass campaign is too slow a burn in itself to have that level of impact. And if you want it to have that level of impact, the challenge to DVSA is you're going to have to get that message out further and wider and quicker than you have done thus far. So we're asking, what can they do to make sure that more people receive those messages and act on them in a positive way? One of the single most significant impacts on driving down test waiting times at any point in this crisis has been returning warrant card holders to the front line. So we also ask in this letter, if that was such an impactful measure, and it netted, by the agency's own admission, nearly 150,000 extra test slots in the period between October 2023 and April 2024, when the majority of people of those 230, DVSA non-examiner staff were back out there doing testing. Why wasn't that measure sustained? Why didn't we keep a significant number of people doing that? I'm aware that some individuals are still out there doing testing, but many have returned to their day jobs. Is there a reason that we can't put some of those people back to testing until we're on top of this, or why were they taken away from testing? And is what they're doing more important than the core remit of actually delivering tests and getting on top of that at the moment? So there is a challenge there on the use of warrant card holders. We make challenges about the booking system and accessibility, and the use of bots still being a problem in there, and what further measures are being taken to deal with third parties being able to still get into the system and sell on tests at vastly inflated prices. We're looking at the fact that this is not only an issue of test supply being an issue for Cat B tests, but the knock-on effect is as well that people haven't had standards checks for a long time. And PDIs were struggling to get parts 2s and 3s. They're slightly getting on top of that now, but it's still not a perfect scenario. And we have ADIs out there who have not had a standards check for 7 to 8 years. Now, some ADIs might think that's brilliant. I don't want a standards check. But the reality is, if we want to be seen as a professional and competent and quality industry, then we need to have more regular competence checks happening than 7 to 8 years in a cycle. So, getting back to a normal level of standards checks is as important, we would argue, as being able to get on top of the issues within Cat B as well. It's not necessarily one or the other. And some of the other symptoms that we highlight in this letter are issues that come out of the overall problem. Is during the period that we've had an issue with overall test supply, we've also seen things like the number of non-PRN tests has increased. So the number of people going on test not in a dual control car and without an instructor, and us not knowing whether they've had any professional tuition at all, has increased during this period. And is that a significant problem in terms of the competency of people who are being, might just scrape through and get a license and be an independent driver? There's also a rise in cheating on tests, impersonation, and on theory test, and it would be a little ludicrous and misleading to say there isn't a direct correlation between that risky behavior of cheating to ensure you don't have to take another test, to ensure you pass the first time, and the test supply issue. People are doing riskier things because of test waiting times. The rise in FTAs, we hope the cancellation period being changed starts to have an impact. It's only been implemented this month. So 7-point plan again, launched in December. We're only seeing some of the significant factors of that being actually implemented now. The rise in complaints against ADIs, there is a rise in complaints against ADIs. It's been happening since COVID. And some of that is triggered by pupils blaming the ADI for things that are not their fault, as in not being able to be put in for their test early enough, even though DVSA advises ADIs to discourage pupils from going too soon. And just malicious complaints because pupils aren't getting what they want and they're going for the ADI rather than the DVSA. And there is the overall increasing burden on ADIs in general, because you are chasing slots, you're getting up at ridiculous times, you're seeing ridiculous waiting times to get those slots, and it's becoming more of a burden in your day and you're spending more time on it in some instances than you might do on teaching. And it's causing issues between you and clients and shifting people around and complaints and disgruntled customers. It is a nightmare for a lot of trainers that are out there. So that's what was in the letter. And as I said, we'll publish that as soon as we can. The other part of the survey is where we asked people to rate the effectiveness of several measures that DVSA took within the plan or have taken additionally to the plan. We'll publish that survey today with this video. The overall rating that you gave to DVSA on how they're managing the crisis is poor or very poor. 79% of you ticked the very poor box when asked the overarching question, how do you feel DVSA are managing this? And if you look through the detail of the report, it also asks you to rate various different measures. But we also ask people for their opinion on other ways of tackling the crisis and other suggestions that they might have as well. So those have been recorded in the commentary, the qualitative response to the report, and those will be forwarded both to DVSA, the Transport Select Committee, DVSA's board, and Department for Transport as well. So these are some of the things that we are trying to do, not behind the scenes, because I'm talking to you about them now, but we've not been as good as we should have been talking about before, to try and highlight the issues suggest some solutions, bring some pressure to bear as to whether, and why some of these solutions that DVSA have tried have not been as impactful as quickly as they should be, and make suggestions of other things that we would expect the agency to be considering at this time. Your feedback in this survey and your feedback to me generally have been invaluable during this time. So please keep giving me that feedback, and we will pass that on as part of our liaison with DVSA. But please be reassured we are doing our utmost to try and tackle the agency, to support the agency where it's appropriate, to offer ways of supporting the agency. The only thing is we can't force them to take up our ideas or offers of help, and they are distracted by the things that they're trying to do themselves internally to deal with it as well. But keep in touch. I really respect the work that you're all still trying to do and achieve out there with all of these difficulties that are on your plate. I hope you manage in some way to have a restful Easter despite all of this, and we'll be back in touch after the Easter break to give you more of an update. Thanks for listening.